Hi there, welcome to the devlog for the open source project Roguelite. This is a first-person roguelite wave shooter. Our goal here is just to prototype a game. It's really early on, but we're getting to the point of an enjoyable game, and we'd love to share with you what we've been doing recently. Let's take a look. In the last version, the player gets to choose a starting loadout at the beginning of each run. This allows them to choose a starting weapon, but it had no bearing on what happens in the game itself, and so they had very little control over strategy. We've replaced this with a sortable list of appropriate buildable upgrades. That is, the player can define the order in which weapon upgrades will be made in each run, and potentially we could add in other kinds of upgrades too. So using this, the player has much more control over the strategy that they're going to use in each run. We have, however, maintained the randomness of a roguelite. So whilst you can define the build order for items that you actually own permanently, you'll still get random upgrades throughout the run, and this can have an unpredictable effect on the strategy that you employ. The level generator has had some love in this release too. The buildings and everything are still mostly grey box, but we do have some new concept models coming in all the time, and here we're looking at a cool new pyramid that we've put in. This was originally submitted as a possible enemy actually, but I scaled it up because I think it makes a great building. There's also a really significant change in this version that might not be immediately obvious. We've replaced the entirely random level generator of the last version with a wave function collapse generation method. Right now the levels generated by this wave function collapse are very similar to the random ones, though the observant player will notice that there's more order to them now. However, this code in the future is going to enable us to build much better levels. Watch out for those changes soon. In further preparation for this work, we're now procedurally generating some of the meshes inside these levels. In this version, only the outside walls are procedurally generated, but we're now geared up to generate an almost infinite number of buildings within the wave function collapse. To do this, we use the open source Procedural Toolkit. There's a link in the description. Future releases will start to replace the placeholder buildings that we've got with procedurally generated ones. We'll still use the manually crafted buildings, of course, because these are key features, but the procedural buildings will enable us to add a ton of variety moving forwards. A game like Rogue Wave can never have too many enemy types, and since Mini Pony from our Discord is still making models for us, we can make more enemies. There's only one new one in this release, the Taurus engine, but there'll be more in the future. The Taurus engine is a big, lumbering enemy that moves slow, but is very hard to destroy. It takes a lot of damage. Fortunately, its weapons are also slow, but if they do hit, they pack a punch. When you do destroy them though, they explode with quite a lot of damage to enemies around them, so time it right and they can be as effective as a well-placed grenade. In order to utilise this new enemy, we added a third level. There's nothing significantly different about this one other than the mix of enemies make it a bit harder, because by the time a player gets here, they're going to be better equipped. Speaking of Mini Pony's models, a couple of them look like they'd make really good cannon fire. So we press them into service. Gone is the old stylized cannon. It's now what I like to call the pointy hot dog. We also gave the new enemy a similar cannon weapon, but this one is using a star ball as ammunition. These add a lot to the overall look of the game, and they've made me think about giving them health and allowing the player to shoot them down as they approach. Just something else to shoot at. Since we'd done a load of work on the enemies, we figured it was only fair to do work on the player too. The nanobot's healing algorithm has been significantly improved. Previously, health would be built in preference to any other item if the player had taken any damage at all. This sometimes meant that building other health-preserving items like shields or armour was a challenge because health was always prioritised. The new algorithm will always build health if the player is badly injured, but if the player is only slightly injured, then preference will be given to other items like movement upgrades or weapons. If the player is moderately injured, then preference will be given to health-preserving items such as shields and armour, and maybe even medkits and so on. Every release has a period of playtesting, part of which is testing the game balance and flow. In this release, we made things a little harder by scattering enemies across the map on startup. This means that the player has to be a little more careful from the first moment of spawning, but the mid and end game remain largely the same. This did make the game much harder, so we also increased the starting max health for the player, and we created a bunch of health upgrades as well, so you can now upgrade the health through the use of the nanobots. And finally, as always, we tried to add a bit more juice to the game, so in this update we've made it that all enemies now explode when destroyed. It's way more satisfying when that happens, right? Why don't you give it a go and let us know what you think? We're a long way from complete. Your input would be really valuable. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Completed.